This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com with the daily wrestling news update. I did a great interview with Mario Mancini, WWE enhancement talent. Had Undertaker's first match, Hart Foundation's first match, Demolition's first match in WWE. So many great stories. Piper was sleeping through it, and she slept through the other interview I did with Bill Bean, Exorcist Minister, just now. But she's waking up to say hello to you fans because it's cold here tonight and she's going into hibernation mode for the winter. But NXT did a 0.15 rating last night. I watched the highlights, and Rick Steiner's kid, I definitely see star potential in him. Definitely. He reminds me kind of Goldberg. It's just too bad they don't give him the last name Steiner. I think it's foolish. I also think, even though I didn't see any highlights of her, Simone Johnson, I don't even remember her WWE. Actually, Ava Rain is her WWE name. It's coming back to me now from some group named Schism, which I think is Carney for the shits. But again, this graphic circulating, why they want to hide that she's The Rock's daughter when everyone that's watching already knows she's The Rock's daughter and the fans want to cheer her. It's not like it's the 80s or the 90s where you can actually hide that it's The Rock's daughter. She even looks like The Rock, but they want to force her down people's throats as a heel. I don't know. They can do whatever they want. I just find it weird. I think that they should have at least started her as a babyface and at least started her with the last name, since everyone knows it's The Rock's daughter. And for the people that don't know, maybe if they advertise it was The Rock's daughter, more people would watch NXT than just a 0.15 rating. But they can do whatever they want. I don't watch it, so I don't care. And most people just watch the highlights or follow the news these days anyways. But in other wrestling news, Ric Flair is getting a Peacock documentary in November, as well as Ted Hart, who is also getting a Peacock documentary. And I did do a review of the Ted Hart Peacock documentary trailer earlier, which was released, and it looks like actually a hit piece on him. And I said I'd only known him through one girlfriend, which was, I think, a girl named Daniela that was gorgeous, that he dated for about 3 months around 2003, maybe, or 2002, 2003. But she was definitely gorgeous. But I also, when I started in Mat Rats, he actually had a kid with a girl, and I remember in Mat Rats, he also had a girlfriend, Men. But then they broke up, and I don't know whatever happened to the kid. He'd probably be in his early 20s now. And as far as the other wrestling news, it's the 25th anniversary of the Montreal Screwjob. And if you don't know why I put Michael Cole and a young boy in the picture, because 25 years ago, I was there for Survivor Series 1997, which overall, the most memorable thing from that pay-per-view was the Montreal Screwjob, and then Mankind wrestled Kane, and I remember he took a good bump into the stairs or something. But other than that, it was a fairly forgettable pay-per-view. I guess Bret Hart did an interview this week saying there was another 25 minutes scheduled into that match against Shawn Michaels. So yeah, I think the fans that were there were happy to be part of history. I'd already seen them wrestle for an hour at WrestleMania 12, which was 11 and 12. I think were my least favorite WrestleManias. I really found that Iron Man match at 12 boring. I'm sorry. I found it boring when I was a kid, and I never wanted to watch it again. I've never been a long match wrestling fan. it's just not my style of wrestling that I like to watch. But I do remember the next night, the Raw was in Ottawa, and that's where the fans really got screwed because the Hart Foundation wasn't there, and a lot of the wrestlers didn't show up in support of Bret Hart. So I remember at that time, because internet wasn't as strong, a lot of us, including my group, thought that the Hart Foundation was still going to show up. And because Bret had already talked about leaving for WCW, and we didn't quite understand how much the heat was. So I remember the next night in Ottawa, there was a lot of people expecting the Hart Foundation to be there. Edge had a dark match against Glenn Kulka that night in Ottawa, which Edge lost. Actually, Glenn Kulka was going to be like the WWE's Goldberg, but I think he had drug issues or something, crashed a car, and then he couldn't go to the U.S. So they ended up releasing him, and I think he had an injury too, injured himself in a match against Don Callis that also put a stop to the push. But originally, this guy named Glenn Kulka was going to be a part of that big new group of Canadians they were bringing in around that time. So yeah, the most memorable thing from that was Butterbean was also there to start his feud with Mark Merrow, but nobody knew who Butterbean was. Because I just remember the talk in the crowd was, who is this heavy guy in the crowd? Because like YouTube wasn't around and stuff. And it's not like he was a mainstream boxing fan, and we weren't hearing the commentators. So people were all very confused about the whole Butterbean Mark Merrow. And Ken Shamrock mooned Shawn Michaels. I don't think they actually showed that. I think it may have happened once the cameras went off, but Ken Shamrock mooned Shawn Michaels. I do remember that night. And Ahmed Johnson wrestled some jobber. And I remember I had second row seats that night with my friends, but my dad had driven us, and my dad wanted to drive but didn't want to pay for the expensive seats, which, by the way, were only $30 then. But he was sitting up in the nosebleeds with binoculars. And I remember him telling me after the show, that the guy that wrestled Ahmed Johnson looked like he was really hurt. And like my dad was saying that it didn't look like a work. So anyways, those are my kid memories from Survivor Series 97 and the Raw the next night. And then, of course, I've said this before, but I ended up, the guy that drove me to Montreal ended up driving Mankind with us kids in the car from the wrong hotel that Mankind went to that night to a different hotel, because we were staying in a town called Dorval, which is near Montreal, has a lot of hotels. It's near the airport. And I guess I forget the name of the hotel, may have been a Comfort Inn or a Quality Inn. But Mankind, I guess, had a room with Kane, who he wrestled that night, but went to the wrong Comfort Inn. And when we pulled in, I happened to have had a Pro Wrestling Illustrated from that month with a Dude Love poster in the Pro Wrestling Illustrated. So when we pulled in, I immediately recognized Mankind in the lobby. So I ran in to get the autograph. Well, they went to park the car. It was my friend's dad, who was from North Carolina, Ric Flair country, and who was actually a big Ric Flair fan. So he signed the poster and he said, "Hey, I went to the wrong Comfort Inn. Do you mind driving me to the right one?" Because he's notoriously cheap. And I guess he figured, these fans are here, why wait for a cab? And I remember that we got in the car, and I remember he was offended that we had all said we were disappointed with the show, because let's face it, other than the screw job, that was one of the worst Survivor Series ever. So I remember he was disappointed in that. And when he asked me who my favorite wrestler was, I said Ric Flair. And he actually yelled at me for being a Ric Flair fan. It later came out that he had huge heat with Ric Flair, but he ended up snapping on me, and like he yelled at me as like a ninth grader. And I remember my friend's dad, who was like maybe in his 50s or something, he was petrified, and he was not a fighter. He was actually a preacher that was in Ottawa as part of this. He was a Baptist preacher, and he was like mad that like this guy was gonna. I was aggravating him so much that he might take his aggression out on him. But maybe he was just uptight because of the whole screw job. But I remember you could cut the tension in the car with the knife. And I remember when he left the car, he pointed at me and he told my friend's dad, "Is this your kid?" And he's like, "No." And he's like, "Well, tell this guy's parents to teach this kid some manners." And he like slams the door and walks off. So we're all like, what an asshole. But we still got a story out of the Survivor Series 97. So yeah, and Bret Hart went on to WCW to make millions. Then he came back to WWE to make more millions. Main evented a WrestleMania, was one of the feature matches against Vince. Used the screw job as a whole angle. Was general manager of SmackDown and various things. So all of his saying that he would never come back and work for them was a load of crap, because money talks, right? The story, I don't have my glasses on. The Gower's Lord says Mick Foley will always be a glorified stuntman. Yes, and like I'm still a Ric Flair fan, but I remember like my friend's dad was just like shaking, and he had said his favorite was Ric Flair too, but then I guess I was more expressive of why I liked Ric Flair, and I guess there was the competition of WWE and WCW, and he had a long night. But I remember he did yell at us, and it was like, and then he was even mad at me. He's like, "Well, if you like Ric Flair, why'd you come in and get my autograph? Why'd you poster me?" It's like, well, I had a Pro Wrestling Illustrated. You were the dude love in the month. And you're a wrestler. Why wouldn't I ask for your autograph? But it was a very tense situation. And yeah, I never actually have really seen him since. I think I was on one the Raw show where I wrestled Eugene in Vegas. I believe he may have been backstage at that one. But if he was, at no point in time did I run into him to even say hello, or to even, like, I would have even brought up that situation. But yeah, I remember even thinking back to it now, like you could cut the tension in the car with a knife. It wasn't friendly Mick Foley driving back with a bunch of kids. It was Cactus Jack, I guess. Anyways, have a good night. That's my Survivor Series 97 moment. I'd like to see Foley try that with me now, 25 years later. That'd be a fun beatdown. Be hilarious beatdown.